Hello everybody and welcome to another live stream. This is the 20th live stream that we've done. Very topical today. I've seen loads of questions already coming in about the CDC and what's going on, so we'll touch on that as a quick update first and then we'll get going. But first of all, if you're here live, thanks very, very much indeed. It's great to have so many people joining live. Remember, everything in this live stream is determined by you, so leave your questions the side. It's a mirror image. Leave your questions there. I will try and get through as many of them as we possibly can in the next 60 minutes. If there's any big pressing topics that I don't touch on, I will try and pick those up perhaps in an update video during the week. If you're watching this afterwards, this is also fantastic. Loads and loads of people watch this afterwards. And remember, if there's a question or topic you don't like, keep skipping forward. Don't just drop out because there is loads of great questions. If you are new here, I'm Gary Bembridge. My channel is called Tips for Travelers, and the objective of the channel is to help make it easier and simpler to find, have, and plan incredible cruise vacations. So, loads of questions coming in, loads of regulars here, Paul, Carol, Hetty, Lou, all sorts of people. But I thought I'd start off and kick off with the CDC because lots of questions are coming in. So let me just throw up one quick infographic, whatever you want to call it, that has been put out by the CDC. Now, for those of you who don't know, the CDC, they have the framework for conditional sailing, or the CSO, as some people call it. There were 4 stages there. There was lots of pressure building up over the last couple of weeks from CLIA, from the governor of Florida, from the travel groups, etc., pushing for them to say, look, the world has changed significantly since October when you released the framework. Vaccines are in place. We've had these many sailings in Europe. So is now the time to lift that order and let us cruise from July, or at least let us bring up test cruises, or let those test cruises happen. Everyone got very, very excited on Thursday, I think it was, when the mayor of Miami, she posted a little social media post about a conversation she'd had with the head of the CDC, saying how optimistic she was and that it was looking great and they were going to issue brand new guidance. And then, as they say, don't always, what you don't pray for, you don't always get what you wish for. So this came out. So basically what they did is they moved effectively from 4 phases to 5 phases, but got around that by making 2A and 2B. Now, 2B is the test cruises. So they brought in this new phase, phase 2, which is called voyage preparation. And a couple of really important things around that I'll touch on, and then we'll get into some of the questions. So first of all, they've added effectively a 5th stage. And secondly, they have put no dates whatsoever on any of these. So if you look at the UK, for example, there was a roadmap, but a series of kind of provisional dates. Very important in that voyage preparation, the new thing that they've brought in is a couple of new requirements. So for example, they are saying that they're shifting from weekly reporting of COVID cases or non-COVID cases to daily reporting. There's a whole lot more restrictions around various testing of crew. But also what they've said is all the cruise lines individually, they can't as one, have to negotiate with all the ports they're calling on or disembarking from and put in place a series of arrangements around medical facilities, quarantining facilities, how, if there's an outbreak, they will get people on off the ship, if there's any evacuation to be done. Secondly, as someone pointed out in the questions, they've also put in a whole lot of new procedures around basically people embarking and disembarking a ship can't be in the same area for 12 hours. So, I guess what that means is if you're coming into a particular port area to check in, the people disembarking can't be in the same area, which is sort of handled differently, but there's a couple of things like that. But probably the most important thing of all is no new timings being put on. And I think many people are seeing this as quite a big setback. They did also acknowledge the importance of vaccines. And as I had tweeted or so on beforehand, is I felt all they were going to do is layer vaccines on top of this. So they have in that section 2, for example, one of the key requirements in that phase 2A is they have to come up with plans on how they will have all the crew vaccinated, how port officials that will interact with crew and passengers will be vaccinated, and also they have to put forward a what's called a process or a procedure around passengers. So what they've effectively done is, instead of the CDC saying before you can cruise, you have to have a vaccine, your passenger vaccine, they're kind of pushed into the cruise line saying, what is your strategy? How are you going to incorporate vaccines into that whole process? So that's kind of a real jog through it. I've probably gone through it very, very quickly, but I thought I'd pick up on a couple of those. So certainly, as we look at the UK, where we've got now 11 lines having confirmed that they will be sailing. I want to pick up one little hiccup potentially there. But 11 lines have confirmed they're sailing, waiting for final plans from Disney and from Marella on what they're doing. But what we've really seen now is in the US, they've had an extra layer, no dates and no sense of momentum. So, so a lot of questions coming like Mike D, and I'll roll back to some of those. Have you reviewed the recent CDC updates in the USA? What do you make of USA cruise restarts? Certainly, as we've seen there, is they've updated it, and there seems no energy or enthusiasm to accelerate things. Now, of course, behind the scenes, we might see that they will start to move to the next stage, stage 2B, and give some dates on test cruises. But in the same press release, they also spoke about still having reservations. So I would say on Thursday, people were very optimistic. On Friday, I would say it's basically in a state of limbo. And so we'll really have to kind of watch and see how that rolls out. I did say I was going to mention something about the UK. One of the things that people have asked me a lot, and it may have covered the question, but certainly people have sent me messages via the channel, is saying, are we 100% sure that the Foreign Office is going to lift the guidance against cruising to allow those UK cruises to happen? And there was a report in the Times today with a bit of a disagreement on the travel task force between the Grant Shapps, who I think I've pronounced it correctly, who's the transport minister, and the Foreign Office, who have the travel advice. Where Grant Shapps is saying, look, we're working to resume cruising. The Foreign Office is saying, well, are we really sure that we really want to lift the guidance against cruising? Now, it seems that that is being resolved, but one of the big issues that we are still waiting from the task force is confirmation that the Foreign Office will lift the no cruise restriction. Now, what I think everyone thinks is going to happen is that we'll have an exception, as they did with river cruising, to allow river cruising to happen. The view is they're likely to lift it for UK only cruising, and the proviso will be that the cruise lines will be responsible if there's any repatriation. Importantly, by the way, for those of you who don't know, the UK people probably do, if you're going on one of those UK cruises, there's three things you have to have in place. One, you have to have COVID insurance, or you have to have travel insurance in place. Number one, it has to be specific cruise insurance. Number two, it has to have specific cover for COVID-related issues. And thirdly, it has to have medical expenses up to £2 million, which is about $2.7 million. So anyway, so that's a kind of jog through where we are. So let's sort of dial back a little bit and just take a look at some of the questions. And as usual, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a combination both of what we're seeing here coming up on my iPad and also the stuff here, because I still haven't figured out why, but I get more things here. So lots of people, Lou asking, raising the point about the CDC. Michelle, hope all is well with you. Yes, very good. Easter. And Michelle asked the question, do you think the CDC is just throwing us another bone with these new guidelines? It feels like, it does feel like a stalling pattern, I guess. Tom was asking, have I seen? I saw that Ben and David had got a video out. I haven't watched the specifics, but certainly that I think I've probably touched on that point there. So some unkind things about the CDC, which I guess is going to be true. So is going to be true for a while. So let me bring up some of the other questions up here, and we'll touch on those. So Robin is asking, we've booked a back-to-back with P&O in the Caribbean. As our return will be 4 weeks later, can we book our return plane seats when booking our outbound seats as we normally do on a 2-week cruise? Now, Robin, I'm not sure if you're booking those flights through P&O or whether you've booked them independently. I'm guessing it sounds like you've booked them through P&O. And again, it will depend a little bit on two things, one of which is whether it's one of their charter flights or whether you're going on a scheduled flight. I'm guessing P&O normally have charter flights, and they normally charge a fee. So I'm not 100% sure, but I would have thought if if they're allowing you to book them either way, because you've either bought that or they're allowing you to, you should be able to. Of course, one of the big question marks we have, of course, is will the Caribbean be part of the green countries to travel with? I think the view certainly from the papers today is that is to be the case. But certainly you should be able to, of course, if it's a commercial flight, you will definitely be able to do that. Adam, I'm booked on the June 2022 cruise to Halifax and John in the Maritimes out of New Jersey. What is there to do in those places, and how cold will it be out in the North Atlantic? I can't specifically answer that question because I was due to do a very similar cruise, and I've never done it yet because it got caught up in the whole COVID stuff. So I can't specifically answer that, but I will try and find out. One of the things I will actually try and find out is Chad Cruises, who are based in Canada. They have obviously a lot of experience around that, so they probably will be really good in terms of answering that. Bookhaven, love your live streams. Well, I really appreciate people joining. It's great that so many people join. Do you think the Canaries cruises in November will cut out mainland stops in light of the way COVID is taking off in mainland Europe? I think the point you're raising is a really key one, and it's still a little bit uncertain around what we think is going to happen with country cruises, particularly in Europe, during the course of the summer as we head into later on in the year. I think the bigger question, I would say, is probably up until around that September, October time. Once we get past that, you know, the COVID, hopefully the third wave they're having, or the third wave they're into, you know, fourth wave, will have gone down. They will be much further through their vaccine process. I think the goal is August, September time to be finished. So I think once you're heading into that time, I think we will be in a much better place. Of course, it does rely on countries having opened for cruising, but it does feel like the vaccine thing will have made a big difference, as we see in the UK. We're starting to see in the US. So I'd be less concerned about that. What's very important, though, is if anybody has a cruise in Europe before that kind of October time, I still think you need to look at that very carefully. So, for example, Disney Cruise Line have just taken off, I think it was on Thursday, it was picked up, that they've taken all of their European sailings right to the end of the European season, which is that sort of September time, off sale. Now, they haven't cancelled yet, but it's normally a precursor. Certainly, if you're looking at what's happened in the UK, all those lines that are running those UK cruises have effectively running them right up to the end of the traditional Mediterranean season. It's very challenging to see how Europe is going to open for cross-country, inter-country cruises with the state of rollout, etc., going on. And also importantly, if you're coming from another country, what the restrictions will be coming in. So I know in the US, for example, the CDC has now said that if you're vaccinated, there's pretty much no restrictions on travel other than a test if the country coming in requires it, and a test coming back. If you're out of the UK, again, we're still waiting for the various country classifications. Can we move around? What will the restrictions be? But it still feels like as we head into summer, cross-country cruising is a challenge. And I think we might see more cruise lines pulling more like that. But I would say as you enter November, I think things, if all goes to plan and we see the impact on cases and deaths and stuff. Because very importantly, what the CDC said is they've reduced the rules around traveling for vaccinated people, as they are saying their data shows that vaccinated people aren't really transmitting and carrying the virus to the same degree or even at all. So that could make a massive change. Tom, I haven't seen this, but I will definitely go and look at it. I picked up the Disney one, but Norwegian Cruise Line taken all July and August cruise offline due to the CDC news. I have a triple booked on Sky and payment info has been removed. Great to know, Tom. I hadn't seen that. I hadn't picked that up. So I picked up the Disney Europe one, but I haven't picked up this. So I'll explore that a little bit more. I mean, one of the other things, of course, to bear in mind with Norwegian Cruise Line is they've already taken a couple of ships off their existing itineraries, and we don't know what they're doing with those ships yet. I guess maybe they were waiting for some of this CDC news to see. They are actually, Norwegian's very interesting because they have, a lot of the other groups like Carnival Cruise Group, the Royal Caribbean Cruise Group, they have moved quite a lot of ships back into the US and got into the CDC stage 1 process. Norwegian Cruise Line has been the most distant from that process. So if you actually look at their listing, they have very, very few ships already in the process. So their ability to get up and running will take longer. So they're definitely up to something, what we're up to. But good to know on that Norwegian thing. If anyone else has found out with their bookings, it'd be great. It would be great to know. Yvonne, I get asked this question a lot, which is around world cruises in January 2022, and looking at flights into Australia. Of course, Australia is always a really difficult one because they have taken the approach, of course, as we know, of kind of a no COVID situation as New Zealand has. So they're particularly robust in their hotel quarantine, whereas other countries like the UK have accepted there is, they're not going for a no COVID situation. They're working on how do you manage COVID. So a lot of that's going to hinge on what happens in Australia, because as you know, they might have literally one case and they will lock down. I think they did it last weekend in Brisbane, for example, where my nephew lives. They closed down again for 5 days because there was one case or two cases picked up. So what's going to happen with Australia is hard to know. They're talking about opening from October, depending on the rollout of the vaccines and stuff, but what the requirements will be. So that is obviously something to watch. The cruise lines have been relatively coy about 2022 world cruises. The only thing I've seen, I think I mentioned last time, is there is some discussion around what itineraries they will be able to run. Will they have to maneuver, change itineraries based on what is and isn't open? So it's a difficult one to know, but I don't have any specific information other than it's, as you say, it's a difficult one. If you are and have a 2022 world cruise lined up, because it's kind of pretty uncertain. Here we are. Here's Johnny. Thank you. Johnny's answered Adam's question. I live in Canada and have spent lots of time in the Maritimes during the summer. Generally, June weather should be fantastic. So that's great to know. Norman saying we're scheduled to go out of Hamburg in June and July on MSC. Is Germany letting in foreign tourists? Well, of course, a lot of that will hinge around what the situation is in June and July. But certainly at the moment, Germany is locking down borders much more strictly. They have quite a fast-growing wave of cases. They have, as we've already referred to, a pretty slow rollout of vaccines. And they have the stop-start with the AstraZeneca vaccine, where some days they stop it for over 50s, and so they have this sort of stop-start situation with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which slows things down even more. At this point in time, the simple answer is, at the moment, there is very strict rules. What they are introducing, though, as part of so they even have, for example, they have some border closures on some of the borders, even with other members of the EU, which upsets the Commission because it's supposed to be more free-flowing. But the EU are introducing their, and I won't get this name quite right, but it's the green not technical passport, a green certificate, which is going to be both paper-based and app-based. So that's going to be across EU. Their goal is to have it up and running by June, and it's initially going to be focused on EU residents, and it's going to have either the vaccine status, some tests, or whatever's required to move between countries, or whether you have the COVID antibodies because you're recovering from it. Now, what they have said is they're looking at using that or opening that up to third countries. So that includes the UK, US, et cetera, so non-EU countries. So we need to wait a little bit and see how that all progresses and how that opens. It's likely, certainly if you're vaccinated, I would suspect that you'll have some kind of system around that. Certainly what we're seeing some of the other EU countries saying, like Greece, Malta, Croatia, what they're talking about specifically is for vaccinated visitors, they're looking at lifting quarantining, so they'll only keep quarantining restrictions for people who are not vaccinated, who are coming in with tests. But if you're vaccinated, you can come into the country and move around. So by June, July, there should be a process for opening borders. There's lots of discussions going on in Europe. There's lots of disagreements at the moment around the pace of opening the borders. But certainly at the moment, there are, as they're heading into the third wave, they're really focusing on locking down. So we'll have to see how that all lifts. But there will be more of a process. June, July is looking, in my personal view, pretty optimistic for cruising to be operating. So Germany did open up initially for cruises for German residents only. They shut it all down, they shut that down completely when they went into their second wave. They did have some cruises running in the Canary Islands around Christmas time, and I think that's pretty much shut down now. because they were kind of in lockdown mode. So it's hard to know how it's going to move forward. So it's kind of 50-50. Will cruises be moving between various countries at that stage? I do think that's going to be a challenge. So I have certainly, I think I mentioned last time, I've moved my June, July, and August cruises that involve going to different countries to next year, because I just don't think the chance of them happening is very high. I may be proven wrong. The only next European cruise that I have lined up is in September, which is a Norwegian cruise, which goes from Southampton, goes to Norway and back. And that will all hinge on if there's because it's only got to one country. So I think that has a greater chance. But again, I think it's still iffy. So hopefully I've answered that. So we don't know, and it could well involve. So let's have, I saw something about volunteer cruises, which I seem to have skipped. So let's go back and have a look and make sure that I'm trying to do this sort of a little bit sequentially so that I don't leave innocents abroad. Bob, as volunteers for test cruises solicited in December, now to be without dates, when do you think tests might occur? Cruise lines moving to Nassau from CDC jurisdiction, how important is it? So, by the way, if anyone's interested, particularly in trains at the moment, and looking for alternatives, do take a look at Innocents Abroad YouTube. They're big cruise fans, big train fans, and have a whole lot of videos. I can't remember, is it episode 13 coming out of part of the trip coming out? Anyway, so I think the test cruise things that I think everyone thought the CDC was going to back away from test cruises. They clearly seem to have test cruises in their mind, despite of all the evidence from other cases. So it does feel like it's going to happen. It was very interesting, actually, because when the CDC issued their guidance for vaccinated people when it came to travel, one of the things I noticed, which kind of was a warning sign, is they had things you could do as a vaccinated person. And the two at the bottom, one of them was gather in medium to large groups, is something that you can't do. So it's hard to see them being prepared to move on that until the vaccine rate is significantly higher. So I don't think we're going to see test cruises for a while at all. I think it's not even on their radar. So I think the point that someone made I saw here is, Carnival made quite a big deal of saying we're waiting for opening from sailing out of US ports. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do now that the CDC has basically said we're still in a holding pattern, and will they follow other cruise lines and set up, out of Bermuda, Nassau, wherever it is, which is an interesting move, because the point that someone made is obviously, the CDC has quite stringent requirements and rules. The cruise lines have quite stringent rules. The CDC ones are probably tighter, but of course, by starting sailing in other countries, the CDC is kind of abdicating or not being involved in those lines sailing, which to me seems like a missed opportunity. The other point I wanted to make, building on this point, which is a really, really important one, I was touching on insurance. I'm a little bit obsessed with insurance and having travel insurance. But of course, what's very important to note is when you travel against advice, your travel insurance is negated. So what's very important, I would say, is if you are looking at those cruises out of the Caribbean, I haven't looked at all of them, but what was very interesting, which was the ones out of the Bahamas, for example, there was a couple of things that were being done to mitigate the fact that your travel insurance won't cover you. One of which is you have to buy the Bahamas medical cover. It's like a tax. It's a visa. It's called a health visa, which costs, I think, between $50 US and $70 US per person. And what's very important about that, that's to cover you if you do need any medical care related to COVID specifically, but other medical things when you're within the Bahamas kind of ecosystem. So that's really important that you're covered. What Royal Caribbean have said, for example, and I haven't seen what Crystal are doing, is they will actually give you some onboard credit to cover the cost, because you have to do that. The other thing, though, is when you look at the terms and conditions for those sailings, they do also talk about how the cruise line will cover the costs if you're forced to quarantine, and will make sure that you get home. So effectively, they're sort of underwriting their own insurance. Very important, if you're looking at doing any of the other sailings, check those, because you don't want to find yourself in a foreign country without insurance if something, God forbid, goes wrong, even if you just break a leg or something pretty awful like that. So a couple of questions around Mexico. At the moment, there are no Mexico ports. Dantes was asking about this. That there are actually no Mexican ports currently embarking. Cozumel did make quite a lot of noise around setting it up. I think lots of questions around, do they actually have the infrastructure, both connections, getting people in, the whole infrastructure to be, refueling, restocking ships, etc. And Bob was basically saying, you obviously fly to Mexico, but there's no ships departing from there. And Lou making the same points as well. Ron saying, I love your channel, which is great to hear. I keep getting emails from princess and celebrity with all kinds of sentiments. This is one of the things it's really, really key, I think, and I keep saying this, is people get very stressed about fares going up and all that kind of stuff. And should they book, shouldn't they book? One of the things that I've seen, and you're right, Ron, I get it not only from those, because I sign up for all the cruise lines, is every day in my inbox, I will get a series of offers which are mostly around bundling things. And this has always been my view, is I think the cruise lines are desperately trying not to bring down the headline fare of cruises. They're desperate to hold that at least 2019 levels. And certainly when I look at the cruises, because I've now moved cruises from 2020 into 2021 to 2022, when I look at those prices, when they're not lift and shifters, the prices generally are about the same. And then you get this bundling in stuff. So effectively, they are kind of cheaper than 2019 in practice, because you're going to get your Wi-Fi, your drinks, or whatever. The one exception, though, which I did want to touch on, is celebrity. Without a shadow of a doubt, celebrity moving, because they've moved to a more all-inclusive fare now. They definitely, their fares have gone up. So when I've looked at shifting cruises, because I didn't qualify for a lift and shift on one of the cruises that have just moved, actually, I was just like, they were doing 4 weeks either side, and I was 6 weeks, just the way it worked. But there was a definite increase in prices, which was kind of related to that all-inclusive piece. But definitely, there is loads and loads and loads of offers. Again, bear in mind, if you're booking for 2021, it is still likely to be a challenge that those specific cruises will run. As we've seen in the UK, just on Taiwan and Singapore, we're now seeing the Caribbean, is cruises when they resume are likely to be new and different. The same as when they eventually started in the US. So be cautious with those deals, particularly try and have a look, I would say, if there's good 2022 deals, of which there are some pretty good 2022 deals. Sandra offering, what do you think about Australian cruises in March 2022 going ahead to, I guess, with international visitors? I'm hoping that it would be, because I think, by then we should be pretty well entrenched, and Australia will be comfortable with people in and out. I'm assuming by that stage they will have found a way of getting out of the hotel quarantine, the 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever it is. This is a really challenging question. Do you think we'll be back to normal by November 2022, as we have a 27-night on Queen Mary 2, have had 3 cruises cancelled so far? It's always hard. It is kind of hard to predict that whole thing, because, in 2020 in March, we thought by November 2020 it would be fine, and then we thought by March, and then so it's hard to predict. However, I think with the rollout of vaccines and the impact it's having, so living in the UK where the vaccine process is going really quickly, I guess we're sort of seeing it, although there's mixed messages come from the US, because we're certainly hearing cases are up a lot. But, look at places like Israel and stuff, the vaccines definitely are the way out. And so a lot of it will hinge around where you're going by November. But I'm assuming if it's certainly within Europe, I think we should be back to some semblance of normal. Now, it depends what you mean by normal. I suspect that we will still find restrictions on perhaps the number of countries we can go to, what you can do in those countries. So, for example, do you have to go on cruise line only excursions? Still at that stage. Will you be tested if you're going to cruise? I think that's going to be, it's going to stay. Will we still have to wear masks? Maybe, maybe not. Will there be social distancing? So I think a lot of those elements, it feels like they will just still kind of be around. I think they're going to lag what's happening on land, because the authorities and the governments are extremely concerned about kind of large scale. They're very concerned about cruising. I know people get very upset about how cruising was dealt with, but cruising is still seen as this high risk activity. So I think we're going to find pretty cautious stuff. So when you say back to normal, it depends what you mean. Are cruises going to be running more to the itineraries that were planned? I would say it's hard to see that wouldn't be the case. Will all of the way that we operated on board be back to what it was in 2019? Unlikely, I think. But it's interesting when we look at what the cruise lines are planning. So if you look at these UK cruises, the rule, it seems to be a little rule which I've picked up, is I think the government has capped, as they've capped with big events opening up, well, it's never been said clearly, but just picking up the various interviews, at a maximum of 1,000 guests. So in the UK, for example, when they've opened new events, like when they've looked at opening stadiums, or they've let big venues like theatres open, they've always had this rule of 50% or 1,000 people, whichever is the lower number. And it's interesting when we look at some of the cruises starting up in the UK, they've spoken about 1,000 guests. So if you look at MSC Virtuosa, which is a massive ship, their first few sailings will only have, I think it's 1,000 guests. When you look at what Celebrity have said, is they're going to start with 50% occupancy, but they're hoping to have built, by the time they get through to September, October time, be allowed to build up to 80%. And I guess the goal they're hoping is once you head into October, November, being able to get back to 100% capacity. So that's also a sense of normality. Now, one of the great things about low capacity, it's probably not so great for the cruise lines, but I was on a cruise, which actually the shutdown happened when I was on the cruise. It was Holland America, 10-night cruise out of Fort Lauderdale. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it was out of Fort Lauderdale. And it was the time when people could cancel. And I would say, I don't know what the capacity on the ship was, but I would say it was between 50 and 60%. And it was amazing because you had so much space. You had, social distancing wasn't as big a thing then, but it was just naturally social distancing. But certainly as a cruise experience, it's great. The big downside, of course, is what's going to happen with ports. So sorry, it's kind of a long way of saying, I think it will be back to some sense of normality. But no. So Spa Robin, I managed to book 3 4-night cruises to nowhere out of Southampton this summer, MSC Virtuosa, P&O Britannia, and Sky Princess. So it'll be interesting to see the new protocols in place. And it's great. So other people in the UK will be really interested to know how many you've booked. I have booked, I think, 4 or 5 now. And what's really important is that's almost the maximum I can do, because there is a rule which hasn't been publicized that well, which comes back to your point about protocols, where you have to leave 7 days in between each of those cruises. Now, it appears to be linked to COVID and moving out of the country, not moving out of the country. So I've had to make sure I've booked them with 7 days in between. So Spa Robin, with those cruises, thinking about the timings of those, I'm suspecting you've probably got quite gaps between. The Sky Princess is only starting, I think, in August, Britannia, middle of July, if I remember, and Virtuosa much earlier. So you'd be interested to know other people in the UK how many they've booked. A lot of people are waiting till they're all out. So I've booked the Saga cruises. One I've booked. Then after that I've got the Britannia, P&O Britannia as well. After that I've got the Cunard, Queen Elizabeth. Then I've got Regal Princess, and then on Tuesday morning, hopefully, goes on sale, the Celebrity Silhouette, and that's basically covered. And then next day I already have another week, and then I've got a normal cruise, which we'll see when that happens. So I think you're right. It's going to be really interesting in new protocols. We still haven't seen finally what all the new protocols are going to be, of course, and very important to know, because a lot of that will depend on what the government's task force says. But I think we've pretty much seen, and you've booked the MSC Virtuosa one, whereas you've got, if you travel with kids or you don't have a vaccine, you have to do a PCR test at your own cost. Very important. It's like 99.9999% certain that you will be tested. We will all be tested before you board the ship with a faster test, the lateral flow test. They've all said in their protocols, masks, social distancing. For example, I got an email from Cunard. We're traveling in the Queen's Grill, so it's kind of you can eat any time. But they're saying that even in those restaurants, there's anytime dining, you're going to have to book your specific time. You're going to have to book to go to the theatre. Saga, for example, are putting on 3 shows instead of 2 shows. And so on and so forth. So you're right, it's going to be great to see those protocols. Now, if you do want to get a hint of those protocols, a little plug here, is I had someone who follows the channel, a guy called Thomas from the Czech Republic. He went on one of the MSC cruises, and I've made a video, which afterwards I'll put a link there, which is what it's like to be on one of those cruises. So you'll get a real sense, a little taster of what it's like to be on one of those. Also, if you want to get another sense, there's another YouTuber, although he's more of a podcaster, but does some YouTube, which is called Cruise Experience. I remember correct, Dario. So if you search Dario Cruise Experience, he's been on a couple of cruises. He's been on MSC, he's been on a Mein Schiff, and he also went on Hapag-Lloyd, and he's made a series of vlogs about what it's like. So they're really, really worth having a look at if you want to get more of a sense of that. Do I have a crystal ball? I wish it'd be great if I did, wouldn't it? Let's talk about some other news, actually, while we're looking at that, is Venice. Of course, some of us are focused at the moment around when we can cruise, how we can cruise, what the protocols are. But of course, there is very, very big news this week around Venice, where Venice with their stop, start, will they, won't they, shall they, will they, where they ban and then don't ban and then do ban ships. But there is a really, really important change happening where they have said they will no longer, certainly in the immediate future, not permanently, allow ships to sail through Venice, through the Grand Canal and so on. And they're moving all cruise ships, so that when they start sailing again, to a commercial port, which is basically on the mainland. And then the idea is that people will ferry into Venice. Now, a couple of the cruise lines had already moved to another port much further away from Venice, whose name escapes me at the moment. So Royal Caribbean, for example, all their Venice cruises are actually about an hour and a half further away from Venice. But this is a really big change. They're not going to let the cruise ships come in now. They have stressed that this is a temporary solution, and they are looking for a more permanent solution, which has more consumer-friendly, passenger-friendly. They are talking about one of the ideas they have is creating some sort of terminal sort of out in the lagoon, so some sort of, I guess, floating terminal. But there's lots of questions around that about how would they ferry people in, and actually from an environmental perspective, would that be sensible at all? Now, Venice had kept playing around with the size of ship for a long time, so that was always something. Someone's just left me. Larry's just left me a super chat. Thanks very much, Larry. That's very much appreciated. Paul and Carol making the point. I saw that as well. So Paul and Carol, other YouTubers, they are always here supporting it, which is great. Norwegian Bliss, there's been lots of pictures, which I guess Andrew, one other blogger, photographer, have been posting. He works in Southampton Port. Norwegian Bliss has actually been in port, and so everyone's getting very excited because it's sort of hanging around the UK, hoping that it's going to come into service. It's been hanging around the UK for a long time. And one of the sister ships, which is Encore, which was hanging around the UK, must be almost about to arrive in the Philippines, taking crew back, unfortunately. But it'd be great if they did it. So everyone's waiting to see what's happening. Norwegian, as I mentioned earlier, or if you just joined, you wouldn't have heard it, but Norwegian have taken 5, I think it is, ships. They've cancelled right through to October, but we don't know what they're doing with those. And there's lots of will they, won't they, sell out of the UK. But of course, it's getting pretty crowded in the UK now. You've got 11 lines, because Royal Caribbean just announced what they're doing. So it's going to be pretty crowded, but definitely I think there'll be a lot of interest in them coming. I get asked this a lot. It depends a little bit where you are, Aid. Is that how you pronounce it, Aid? Lovejoy. What is your opinion is the best insurance cover for cruising? Now, it depends where you're based. So I'll talk a little bit about the UK, because that's where I'm based. So in terms of the UK, and it depends a little bit around whether you have pre-existing medical conditions or not. So let me talk about if you do have pre-existing conditions and if you don't have pre-existing conditions. But really, really important, if you're going to go on cruising, make sure that your insurance company does specifically cover cruising. That was the thing that I had some challenges with. Most of the cruise lines that are based in the UK have a partnership with a company called Holiday Extras. So certainly that's a good place to start if you're looking for insurance, because they have a partnership with all the cruise lines. The cruise lines know the policy. I'm sure if you click through via their site, they assume they get some sort of commission. But really important, you don't have to go through their site. But really important is they have insurance which the cruise lines themselves endorse and are happy with. So that's a good place to start. Now their prices look pretty reasonable, actually. I was just looking yesterday for my partner for cruise insurance, and it was a pretty good price. Importantly, they include COVID cover as well. So I think, for example, a partner's 52, no medical conditions, looking for a worldwide, including US, because that's slightly more expensive, including cruise. And I think it was about 100 either had bronze, or they also had bronze, silver, gold, platinum, whatever, which of course just goes up in value terms. But I think the bronze was about £100 for an annual policy. So that was a pretty good price. So they're a good place to start to get a benchmark of. Another good one to start is All Clear. So All Clear is particularly good if you have medical conditions. So I have to get medical insurance cover because I'm in remission from cancer. So I have to get specific cover for that. So Holiday Extras, because the type of cancer I had, they wouldn't cover it. But when I went to All Clear, they have phenomenal cover with all sorts of medical conditions. But it does range then anything from like £100 to £1,000. So that's like from $150 to like $1,500, depending on, so they will pretty much cover any opportunity. So that's kind of like the two certainly that I've looked at, had kind of good reviews. Of course, you have to have a look at yourself and tell me I'm not strongly recommend this, but I'm suggesting there's a good place to start. If you're in the US, what I've seen is Doug Parker, who runs Cruise Radio, who does a lot of coverage actually of cruising. He works a lot and talks a lot and has on his show quite a lot at tripinsurance.com. And they talk a lot about insurance. So that's probably a good place to start. I think they're more of a comparison website. And of course, there are comparison websites in the UK as well that you could look at. But definitely really, really, really important with the cruise insurance is if they've got a cruise specific, because that will cover things like being evacuated from the ship and all those kind of little nuances. Also, really, really, really important while I'm on that thing is the cruise lines in the UK, and I don't know if it will be true when we see what happens in the US, and I'm not sure what's happening out of Italy, but when you go to the port in the UK on these short cruises, you have to show your vaccine status, your test if it's required, your passport, which is very important, but you also have to show a copy of your insurance for them to check. And they said they will refuse boarding if your insurance isn't the right insurance. So it's really important. In the past, when you were checking in, you would just fill in your name of insurance company and it was fine. So that could be another important. KB, I can't believe it. You have no question. KB is Happy Easter. Normally has some difficult question to answer. I'm sure KB you'll be thinking of one imminently soon. Great, thanks. Now, wow, if Lyle Larazov, if I hope I pronounced that correctly, I apologize if I haven't. No tea today, water. Any news about European river cruises? Greetings from sunny Cyprus. Well, of course, Cyprus is becoming a little bit of a European cruising hub, which it was perhaps not before, with some home porting taking place there and some suggestions of maybe more. In terms of European river cruising, I do have a little bit of an update on that, and it's kind of mixed news. So Riviera, which run quite a few ships, they're saying they're going to start running some limited ships actually from the end of this month into May. And what we heard from some other river cruise lines was trying to find out from across Europe, for example, they're hoping also to start. Now, really importantly, they're probably going to be focusing very much on EU guests initially, and they may have to be very domestic. So there's still uncertainty around what's going to happen from that. So certainly, I'm guessing if you're in Cyprus, if you live in Cyprus, so certainly as part of the whole EU, assuming that you're allowed to move around, you should find there are some river cruising options available. However, the ones that rely a lot on English-speaking travelers, so ones that rely a lot on US, very big, so Uniworlds, Avalons, Emeralds, and so on, UK and Australians won't be coming, I guess, this season because they can't fly until October at the moment, at the earliest. So they're talking much more at the moment. Most of them have cancelled through to sort of June, July time. I'm very interested to see what's happening with Viking, because Viking had cancelled, if I remember correctly, through to the end of May. But I'm expecting they will come up the woodwork soon, and we'll see what they're planning to do imminently. So there is going to be some patchy startups. So we've seen, so most of those like Crystal, etc., they're talking really June, July time at the earliest. And a lot of that will hinge on when, come back to an earlier question around when people will be able to fly in, particularly from the US. But certainly some of the European lines are hoping to start up sooner. I was quite surprised Riviera starting up sooner because they rely a lot on the UK, and we don't yet know whether the UK is going to allow people to travel into Europe. Lots of mood noise that they may not, or even though theoretically from May we can. So certainly you're going to find some patchy stuff starting up. So if you're looking for European river cruise, I would look at some of the very specific European ones. So Across Europe is a good example of those. Nico cruises would be another one to look at. But those Avalons, Viking, they're definitely a bit later. Now, Amber Waterways is Rudy Schneider, I think it's pronounced it, who is one of the owners and creators of Amber Waterways. He's very open and public about it, and what he's saying is he reminds everybody that they'll start sailing as soon as they can basically fill the ships. It takes them 10 days to 2 weeks to switch on a ship. So as the situation in Central Europe gets better, I think we'll see river cruising come on pretty quickly. David, this is the answer is no. I've been chasing this as well. So this question around Disney UK cruises, they haven't come out. The only thing we know is they're going to do 2, 3, and a very limited 4-nighters, but they haven't come out with it. And I think everyone's expected. Talking to travel agent friends, and so they also don't have any news at all, because they normally get an embargoed thing. So I know, for example, I knew that they had the celebrity dates. I knew that they had the Royal Caribbean dates. They normally had them a couple of days before, but they have had nothing from Disney. So nothing, now the UK is pretty much, I guess, nothing's going to happen until Tuesday now at the earliest. So no, and I'm really keen, because Disney is definitely one that I'd really like to try. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to fit that in. I know lots of people are interested. I'm guessing they'll be quite expensive, if that helps. I'm not sure it really does. Disney Magic has been, when all the Disney ships, by the way, were in the UK waters, they all moved across. So 3 of the ships are within the CDC process, and the Magic, which is the one they're going to be using, had been sticking around the UK. So which cruise line would you recommend? Okay. I love your videos. Which cruise line would you recommend for the Caribbean for a couple? Alex, this is one of those questions that's is always a good one to try and answer, but it's a little bit like how long is a piece of string, because the challenge is pretty much every single cruise line operates in the Caribbean in the season. So a lot of it hinges around pretty much what you're looking for, you will find in a cruise line. So if you're a couple, so that's good to know. So if you're a couple that likes a more traditional cruising experience, for example, you should be looking at your Princess or your Holland America kind of situation. If you are, youthful and want a much more party-like atmosphere, take a look at the new Virgin Voyages, which of course never sailed yet, but haven't been on their ships, and you can see what they plan to do. If you're looking for a let your hair down party fun ship, you've got, and pretty good price, you've got Carnival. If you look at the big resort ships, you've got Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, you've got Windstar going. So there's a huge range. But I'll tell you, the other thing that you may want to consider, though, for the Caribbean is look at some of the lines with smaller ships. So if you take a look at Oceania, for example, or Azamara, probably less so because they're not on the Caribbean that often. But if you like a slightly smaller ship experience, take a look at Oceania. So my last Caribbean cruise that I did on Oceania. It was great. It's like 600-700 passengers. So you don't have all the queuing, you don't have the big massive things. They often go to slightly different ports. So you pull into a port and you can get off the ship in minutes, and you might have the big mega ships, then you've got thousands and thousands of people piling off. So what I would say, Alex, the key is think about what do you really want. You want really relax, not have to dress up kind of thing. But there's with the Caribbean, there's almost like enormous choice. So if you want, if you want to drop me a note, if you just drop me an email, so it's gary@tipsfortravels.com. Tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for, and I'll be very happy to perhaps zone it in a little bit. But it's quite challenging when it comes to Caribbean. There's so much choice. And as Lou said, is definitely talk to a travel agent, because what I would say is, they would ask you those. A good travel agent, a good cruise travel agent will ask you those questions around what are you looking for, what are your key requirements, what sort of, do you want to dress up, don't you want to dress up, all that kind of stuff. Almost more important questions than price, because you can normally find out the price perspective. The mistake a lot of people say is, they get really hung up on price. But remember, there's all different types of cabins, so you'll normally find that. So Hetty asking a question, following on the insurance question. Are you saying that if you get an annual insurance package privately, you don't need to buy the individual cruise lines? Absolutely, 100%, yes. Hetty, I never buy the cruise line insurance. I always have my own insurance. And you can just buy it for that cruise specifically. The reason I like to have annual insurance is it then covers you for cancellations. So as you know, sometimes you might not be able to go for sickness, work, whatever reasons. And the cruise lines normally, in normal times, are pretty strict on cancellations, even with deposits. So if, you can sometimes book movable deposits or refundable deposits. The advantage of having the year-round policy is it will include cancellation insurance, and that's one thing I focus on. But even if you're booking just a one-off cruise, say you're only going on one cruise in the year, I still would tend to buy insurance privately, just because then you can really focus on what is it that you want. And the cruise lines, of course, are always keen for you to buy insurance through them, but I would always, worst case scenario, compare, I would say, definitely. Cleopatra 561, after having 5 cruises cancelled on Oceania in 2020, wow. I've rebooked 2 beginning the 7th of November. I'm assuming that's US. I'm assuming you do the other way around. So we would do here Monte Carlo, Rome, Miami. We're vaccinated. I believe Europe won't be a problem, but will we able to end in Miami? So a couple of points is by November, which I'm guessing the ships move across, by November, as we said, I think from a Europe perspective, vaccination will be a much further process. So it's very possible. It's looking promising. In terms of getting into the Miami, the existing framework for additional sailing expires on the 31st of October. So unless they renew it, you will be fine, because those restrictions shouldn't be applying by then. Critical thing is, I guess we'll see is what Oceania eventually decide to do and where they move their ships. But I think by November things hopefully will have some more semblance of normality. But if you're worried about that rule about cruises can't be longer than a week heading back into the US, so even if the CDC stalls, as long as they don't and don't basically allow cruising, that conditional framework finishes on midnight, whatever it is, midnight, I guess, on the 31st. So you should be okay from that perspective. I don't know, is Terry asking me this question or somebody else, but I'm in the UK, so I'm based in London in the UK. So the Jam asking, is yearly travel insurance available in the USA? I was unable to find it. I thought I'd always seen it, but I can't answer that question 100%. Paul and Carol saying the same thing. Our annual insurance covers all the cruises we take through the year. Certainly on that annual travel insurance, a good person to ask, and I'll also ask as well, is Doug Parker and Trip Insurance, because he talks a lot about that. So that's certainly always been my experience, but I don't know certainly for the US. So I'm just checking on here and just going to have a quick dial back and make sure that I'm not missing any big questions. Talk to travel agent, we've said that. Insurance, we've covered that. So I hope you love your videos, good tips. Okay, I'm going to touch on this one. It's quite good when you have someone not disagreeing, having a different point of view. Thomas, I want to say I love your videos, which is fantastic, good to hear. Agree with most of your tips, which is good. Except not staying on the low cabins on a river cruise. My wife and I actually find these cabins quite cozy. Just for some background, for those who haven't seen it, is the video I had, which came out last Sunday, I think, last Sunday, was about some of the watch outs for river cruising. And I put in a couple of things in there, one of which I knew would cause some people would disagree with, which is the lower cabins. So those of you who haven't been on a river cruise before, the lower cabins, you normally have like 3 layers of cabins, and the lower level is basically below the water level. So you'll have so if you're in your cabin, you'd say from here downwards is under the water level, and then you'll have a long, thin, sort of rectangular window there, which which is above the water, obviously. So my always concern with those cabins is I'm not a big fan of those cabins, particularly on something like the Danube, because you'll go through an enormous amount of locks and things. And I actually find the noise and stuff being underwater kind of a bit disruptive. So I actually, in that video, I admitted to having if those are the only cabins available, I have chosen not to go on a river cruise. I've also done a barge cruise where all the cabins are below water, and it was pretty noisy as well. I did get more used to it actually after a couple of days. So I always tend to not use those cabins. But of course, quite a few people have commented saying they disagree, because first of all, they're generally less expensive than the balcony cabins, and a lot of people do find them, as they say, cozy. So it's good to know that you were offended by my thing. But so it's definitely, there are people who love those cabins, and they are, I guess, they are cozy because they're down, just the little curtains. Also, really importantly, though, building on Thomas's point about those lower cabins, you can also argue against those cabins, which I did mention in the video. Against the balcony cabins, because if you go on the very busy rivers, you go on the Danube particularly, or the Rhine particularly, those are really, really busy. So in normal times, like it's in 2019. So I went on a cruise, for example, two river cruises in 2019, which was fantastic. One on the Danube, no, both of them on the Danube this time. But I had a balcony cabin, which is great when you're sailing. However, in every single place that we docked, we had ships on either side, because the way that it happens in the European rivers is, it's not like in ocean cruising where everyone has their own dock. They'll normally, because there's not much docking space, they'll normally go side by side. So you can normally have up to 3, very occasionally 4, but it's normally 3. So we always end up being the one in the middle. So I always, even though I had this beautiful balcony, I was basically looking bang into another cabin every single time. Now, when you're sailing, of course, it's fantastic. So really, really important, I think, a watch out is, do have a little think around. There is a risk if you get it. Look at the itinerary, because if you've got lots of sailing or sailings during the day, having a balcony cabin could be very nice. You can sit in the bed and watch it all pass by. So there are definitely kind of the pros and the cons from that. But it's always good. I mean, what's always good is it's always good to have people who have opinions and do it in a very polite way, which is very nice. Which is, anyone who's ever looked at the comments on my YouTube channel will know that's not always the way it is. One of my best comments, I didn't actually post it. I had a fabulous comment this yesterday, which I was trying to post it, which said that I go on the most boring trips and vacations that they can possibly imagine, which I thought was quite interesting. So I've always never thought I was doing anything boring, but there you go. Celebrity, I didn't mention celebrity, Bob. Yes, celebrity. I really like celebrity. Celebrity is probably, it's more traditional without a shadow of a doubt. And it's great for the Caribbean. The one before I did on Oceania, I did on celebrity, I had a great time. I do like celebrity ships. They're a little bit more contemporary, a little bit more modern to me. Obviously, the new Apex ones, they're also a very good one. Deb asking around Seabourn. So Seabourn, they kind of, all of the Carnival group kind of went a little bit quiet. So they'd all moved their cruises, and they have a date by date, and I can't remember the dates offhand, but on my website at tipsfortravellers.com, there's a page there which is called When Are Cruise Lines Sailing Again, where I try and keep it up to date with all the latest dates. So I have it in there, and they have a series of dates that they're doing. I think what we are now all waiting for, looking back to how we started this conversation, is what is going to happen now that the cruise lines have seen the CDC kind of non-movement. So will we see another raft of things pushing back? Because at the moment, if you look at that list, the bulk of cruise lines are theoretically starting in June. However, that's physically pretty much impossible, because you have to have 30 days notice before you can run test cruises. So once the CDC says you can run a test cruise, there has to be a month before they can run them. So let's say they did approve them now. So you're talking right through into May. They then have to run the cruises, however long that's going to take, a week, 2 weeks. It then takes 60 days to be able to run the cruises. So we run the cruises in May, 60 days is June into July. So you see what I mean in terms of timing. They just physically can't do it. So, even optimistically, the best we can hope for is June-ish, late into May, into June kind of test cruises. So certainly those, so it's almost saying, I don't know the answer to Seabourn. On the page I have what it is, but it's unlikely to happen. They're going to have to push it back. Of course, they do have some starts in different parts of the world, but again, because they're very reliant they fill the ships mostly with US passengers. A lot of it will depend on people being able to move around. 2022 is getting very, very busy for Hetty. It's getting very busy for me. I think I mentioned before, pretty much, and I'm sure most of you have got the same thing. Pretty much all the cruises I had in 2020, I moved to 2021, and now they've moved into 2022. So 2022 is looking pretty busy. Here's a very nice comment from Chris, which says, "I've never been interested in cruising until I stumbled into your videos. I love the way you present information, the videography. Somewhere along the way, I got booked for Alaska." That is a big win. So it's great to hear that, Chris, because certainly it's fantastic. When I see people, I get a lot of people saying, I've watched quite a few, so I say, well, not lots, is an exaggeration, who said, I wasn't into cruising, I came across your videos, started watching, and I'm hooked and I've booked, which is fantastic news. The more people we can get cruising, the better. Let me pick on this question, because I'm aware that we're coming out of the time that I promised to keep you. Do you think there will still have full entertainment and deck parties on the UK Crystal cruises? No, is the answer. They will have to operate within the guidelines. So what we've seen happen on the other cruises is the deck parties have not happened because it's too hard to practice social distancing. We've also seen things like captains' cocktail parties also tending to be scrapped on the other cruises that run around the world. In terms of entertainment, yes. So what we've seen happen is you have to book to go to the theatre. Depending on the size of the ship, they might run more shows. So some of them have been running matinees, sort of early evening and late show. You have to book to go, and then so they can spread out the seating. They have been running some of the normal things, so there have been some activities, but again, it's restricted by number, so you can't sort of just decide, right, I'm going to rock off and go and do the quiz or whatever. So I think we will certainly, deck parties, they will be restricted. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle things like sail away, but certainly that's, I will be extremely surprised if they do those because they're just hard to control. But in terms of entertainment, we will have the shows and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely for sure. So I think it's probably, I'll do this one more. Any news on the Disney Magic UK cruise? No, but I'm hoping we hear next week. Thanks so much. 60 minutes gone by. We've had loads of fantastic questions, which I really appreciate. Just a little teaser tomorrow, video tomorrow coming out, 6 o'clock. What about this little teaser there? This is around cruises that you should or shouldn't be looking at kind of moving forward. So that's out tomorrow, so it'd be great if you watch that. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you've found this interesting and helpful. I really appreciate that so many people come and join live. I hope you have a great rest of an Easter weekend and you basically chill out. And although it's going to be freezing cold here in the UK, I hope it's going to be warm where you are. So take care of yourself and see you next week.